Welcome back, and thanks for sticking with us through that. We gotta get set up for Bankyugi here. He's new, doesn't know how things work around here, but I'm sure he'll settle in very, very shortly. Especially as well, he's in good company with Tyler, who often delays us with his various antics, setting up whatever new piece of technology he's just bought for his house.
I sense a new Hearthies category, Dark.
Best staller, yeah,
Mhm.
very possibly, very possibly. But
It goes to the casters, obviously.
yes, exactly. We choose to have these stall talkstone breaks. We love nothing more than filling time. But I think with that out of the way, we are pretty much ready to jump into the action. And the first match between these two players, as we were saying, is going to be the Rogue up against the Mage. Tyler's Rogue is fairly standard aggressive stuff in terms of the weapon version of the deck. It's not the full-on stealth version, even though it does still have a fair bit of the stealth package. It's running instead the Steel Dancer, Self-Sharpening Blade, and Cutting Class as well.
I find this deck just so fun. It reminds me a lot of Oil Rogue from back in the day, just getting these giant weapons and shipping them to the face very often. Doesn't quite have room for Blade Flurry, but that's very much because this rogue is not concerned too much with board control, at least not beyond the first cup, because it tends to be able to close out the game with that weapon damage and Secret Passage with the consistency so much. On top of that partial stealth package that you were talking about, still has Spy Mistresses and Worgen Infiltrators there to make sure you can get a one drop online alongside that Greyheart stage. But it's not running the Ash Tongue Slayer that you might have seen from the other builds a while ago.
Yeah, I think it's, in my opinion, a slightly better build of the deck and should function very well against the Mage, actually, because with all of the new cards that you're trying to fit into the Mage deck with, like, Combustion, Devolving Missiles, Jandis Barov, all this stuff, you have to cut the weapon removal, it would seem, from Bankyugi's perspective. So there's no Ooze in the deck, no Harrison Jones in the deck. Instead, going to be having to tank a lot of damage from that self-sharpening sword that Tyler can go face with over and over again.
Seems like every season Tyler's backdrop gets more and more filled out with swag.
Yeah, I mean, you're talking to the guy who owns a $10,000 coffee machine, all right? He's not going to mess around with
All right. And he also owns a very stellar curve, the Spy Mistress into Sneaky Delinquent into for this deck. It's self-sharpening sword. Doesn't even run Hooked Scimitar in this deck because this one has enough charges on it, and coupled with Dr. Krastenov, for example, to even keep the charges going, tends to be enough damage.
That's exactly right. It's such a crucial part of the deck. It's kind of like finding Stormhammer at the start of the game for the old Dragon Aggro Hunter builds that would just go face over and over again with it. And especially if you can find the Volpira Toxin Blade in order to buff the attack, or of course just a classic Deadly Poison. This is going to be a tough match for Bankyugi to win in his first streamed game of Grandmasters.
And we saw from Bankyugi a pretty straightforward mulligan. I don't think you can afford to keep Twilight Drake, even though it is probably in the lower half of costing cards in the deck. He really wanted to find Arcane Breast to deal with these low health taunt minions. Doomsayer, crucially, to give him some breathing room. I feel that if Mage has any chance of this matchup, it heavily relies on a big swing turn. Reno the Relicologist possibly as an option, but even on the 6th or 5, if he wants to coin it out, might be a little bit too late just because this rogue gets so it gets rolling so fast with the weapon damage.
And so if we are talking about the Reno being a little bit slow here, was there any consideration for going Zephrys Wildgrowth there in order to get it down that turn earlier with the coin?
Definitely a consideration, but maybe the thinking there from Bankyugi is that the minion damage is actually the secondary part of his problems. After the first wave of minions, Tyler is probably just going over the top with his weapon damage with the eviscerates, and so Bankyugi could be prioritizing using the Zephrys for removal. Weapon removal in particular.
And that seems to be what he's going for. Very nice use of the Zephrys here, and I think highlighting that he has the removal. You know, Reno does a similar job, similar enough to the Combustion or the Rolling Fireball that he has in hand. There's no need to get it down as early as possible.
And removing that central threat of the self-sharpening blade is already so much damage saved from Bankyugi's face there. It just compounds, right? First hit deals 1, +2, +3, +4, and then there's also any threat of the deadly poisons, Dr. Krasinov, and that Volpera coming down later. I think Zephyrus essentially functioned as a bunch of healing there as well.
So obviously when you have a secret passage, you don't get any inherent benefit from having less cards in your hand, but you kind of want to have spent them. For me, it feels like you want to have got the value out of your cards for when you do go for it to get maximum mana utilization each turn. Which is why I'm a fairly big fan of going for the Eviscerate here. It does feel to me, now that the Self-Sharpening Sword is gone, that Tyler has to win board control in the next few turns if he wants to win.
That while a 3-1 is not really presenting that much in terms of board control, I also agree that he needs to get a more spectacular secret passage. So just using the rest of his cards to spend the mana for that turn and then trying to delay the secret power as long as possible so that he can actually spend all 5 of the cards he gets off of that is looking to be the game plan here.
I also really like from Bankyugi just the quite liberal use there of devolving missiles. His mana is completely spoken for the next 2 turns at least, with 5-drop into 6-drop Jandis, Reno, whatever it may be. And so just getting that down to save 2 health and de-stealth it sounds smart.
Yeah, I like that as well. Bankyugi has a stellar curve for the follow-up and has removal if he ever needs to deviate. I would absolutely just slam this Jandis here, but there's, I guess, some room for hesitating because of a possibility for Doomsayer. However, because if he gets that Doomsayer to activate and then the follow-up for that would just be Kartut Defender, I think going proactive here versus a 1-1 makes a lot more sense.
Yeah, I agree completely. With this into very possibly Reno, Bankyugi can just lock down the board, which is exactly what we were talking about. In this build, when you've destroyed the Self-Sharpening Sword, that is when you have to realize your opponent has to win board. So if you're making strong tempo plays, they're not going to be winning board.
All right, with the Dr. Krasinov, this actually allows Tyler to buff up that weapon once more and get a 1-cost cutting class. Further delaying this passage sounds pretty nice to me, and even though he'll be using 1 charge, there's still 2 after the Krasinov that comes down to eventually use with Steel Dancer.
So this for me is where you reach a pretty big impasse in the game plan as to how you want to approach it. You need to decide whether you want to go for Secret Passage now to draw another weapon from the deck and buff that, or you can just go for buffing your relatively mediocre dagger here instead.
Yeah, and he's going for the game plan you suggested, even sapping away that Frostwolf Warlord. To be fair, there are not that many taunts that Tyler would have to worry about. Just so happens that the Kartut Defender is in hand. Probably not the play for this turn, but later on could come back to bite Tyler that he won't have a sap to answer it anymore. I'm definitely just looking at Reno for this turn from Bankyugi.
Yeah, I agree. The Wrathscale Naga is kind of annoying here, and so just getting it out of the way definitely feels like the way to go.
And just the 4-6 presence is better than anything else he could have developed alongside clearing the board.
So now it's decision time, right? Is Tyler going for Krasinov buffing this weapon, or does he have to play Secret Passage first to find that Self-Sharpening Sword, because that's his real win con now?
Really tough. There was also another line of just starting with Cutting Class, for example, to maybe give him something better to do with his mana than a Krasinov that immediately dies.
Blood and plunder.
I think it's pretty close, because Tyler needs to start appreciating that over the next few turns, unless he gets an incredibly powerful Secret Passage, he's probably going to lose board control. This is where Mage starts doing their powerhouse plays when the Dragon Caster comes down, when of course Reno, the amazing Reno, can come down later on as well.
With that set of draws from the cutting class, though, I think Tyler recognized this is a good window to try and stave back board control in his favor. Might be the last pot for it, but he at least was hoping to stick that stealth minion for Greyheart Sage to combo off of, but the new spell Combustion for Mage comes in super strong for Bankyugi there.
Ooh.
Oh man, he's 1 mana short of being able to play both the Self-Sharpening and the Jandis.
Yeah, that's pretty rough, right? Because he wants to get the Self-Sharpening Sword down for, like, his macro game plan, but in terms of right now, he has to do something a little bit more impressive. This is a pretty threatening Twilight Drake on the board. So I am kind of just leaning towards Jandis Barov coming down to try and get any kind of board presence at all.
Yeah, I'd have to agree. Just slam a backstab as well because it's not coming back after this turn. The Surger actually allows him to kill off
True.
Twilight Drake if he wants.
Yeah, I guess you take that.
One of those interesting things too where like he could have just thrown away a backstab even though it's not dealing any additional damage so that it's not possible as a top deck anymore. I think it's getting to the point in the game where you don't want a top deck.
Yeah, I think that was a better line. And I think the thing for me, even though that's, I agree, a slight, small micro game error, in terms of his macro game plan, I still am tempted by the idea that he should have gone for an earlier play of the Secret Passage. Just get that down earlier. Start finding the cards that actually win the game, instead of this kind of piecemeal approach where it's not really actively pushing onto the board and moving towards a win condition.
Very possible. And Bankyugi with a clean Doomsayer can get down this power of creation, all but lock out the game from this point. So for Tyler, the way he can come back into this is first the power of creation needs to be some giga whiffs. It can't be taunts, and it also can't be anything too high attack because Tyler's very close to dying. And second, the Secret Passage needs to pull the Seconding Sword again.
Job's done.
Now, those are not whiffs.
Yep, that's 8 attack minions for all intents and purposes in terms of the damage that's going to be dealt next turn. So Tyler needs something right now, and Secret Passage has got to deliver.
That's a whole bunch of nothing. He can kill one off between the backstab and his Volpera Toxin Blade.
Yeah.
But it seems like this entire game Tyler has been playing from behind ever since that first Self-Sharpening Sword was removed.
It really does. It speaks to the game plan as a whole, right? That's how the broken things in the deck happen, with Steel Dancer smacking face every turn, Dr. Krastenov. And instead he used all his weapon buff effects on a dagger, none of which really were powerful enough to actually move the game towards the win condition in its own right.
And for Bankyugi, he has an active Tortolan Pilgrim, or just the guaranteed Blizzard. I definitely like the sound of just Blizzard Mana Saber and ship your 8 to face. In terms of best outcomes from Tortolan Pilgrim, I don't think there's a Conjurer's Calling in the deck, but there is still a Deep Freeze.
Yeah, Deep Freeze, I guess Puzzle Box as well. You wouldn't turn your nose up at this point necessarily.
I feel like Puzzle Box is the way Bankyugi loses from here.
Ah, you're a non-believer, I see.
He's
Disgusting.
in such a good spot.
Yeah, very, very fair. And it's good to have a panic button at this point, because Tyler does have a decent amount of cards at this point. He's managed to wrestle his way back from absolute nothing. And even though he's decidedly losing board here, he can maybe start to wrestle it back through the power of Self-Sharpening Blade. Maybe.
Bankyugi decided to go for a very conservative approach there, which honestly, that probably gets him there too, because I didn't notice Tyler had 3 cards left in deck at this point.
Oh,
Doing the
wow.
Toxin Blade definitely made some sense there. I was getting a little carried away with 8 to face, but I think he definitely could have gotten away with sending 4 to face. It could very well be the fact that Bankyugi sees Tyler has basically nothing left to play with, just being so conservative with his line.
Can that be right that he has 3 cards left? I mean, has he drawn that many over the course of the
Secret
game?
Passage is card draw.
Yeah, but it shuffles them back in, right? I mean, I guess he played
No, but
most
then
of
you
them.
get your original cards
Yeah.
back.
Yeah, fair enough.
Mana Saver allows him a nice 11 mana turn. Yeah, Tyler's threats were all just defused from the very beginning. You and I have some questions, I suppose, whether there was a window for him to maybe get a bit greedier with how he spent some of those weapon buffs.
Yeah, I mean, that's really just the decision point for me, because his game plan, it just clearly hasn't worked out here. Maybe he was just anticipating on Bankyugi having a weaker hand on average, but basically anything that the mage can do in the late game will be more powerful than the relatively weak stuff that Tyler can do, unless he activates his self-sharpening sword. That's the beating heart of the deck. And so without that being buffed, buffing up your huge Steel Dancer minions, getting down these cheap Dread Corsairs as well, the deck is not going to function well enough.
The Deep Freeze was the only spell left there. I don't know, Derek, this game kind of reminds me a little bit of one that we played during WSOE, where one player, if their weapon sticks, has the absolute nuts, but if the other player gets the Zephyrus Ooze, then they just lose.
Yeah, and one player did get Zephyrus Ooze, and one player won. Bankyugi, my man, coming through and taking down Tyler there in stunning fashion.
And that already is huge for Bankyugi there, because we had questions about this mage. We thought that this could particularly fall prey to the aggressive decks from Tyler's lineup, and being able to get that out of the way right off the bat is huge for Bankyugi there now, because he has, I guess, some more highly represented classes remaining. The interesting thing is he's not running Druid.
He is not running Druid. The one player that we have here in Asia Pacific not running Druid. We also have only one non-priest as well, but that is not Bankyugi. I think it again
Respect
speaks
to that person.
Yes, exactly. It speaks to a different practice group, a different mindset that he's bringing to the tournament. Because I agree with the principle here that Druid is not necessarily so powerful that it's a 100% auto bring. But if you're not going to bring it, I think you have to have a strong reasoning behind that, which Bankyugi does kind of have. You know, he's got this much slower, more controlled archetypes here, which I think is very possibly trying to prey on aggro archetypes from his opponent, which Druid doesn't do so well. And to be fair, at least here in the top 8, it's a fairly aggressive set of decks that he's going to be lining up against. So I can at least appreciate the thought process from him.
Yeah, definitely the Bring of Warrior and the Galakrond Rogue as being more anti-aggro makes sense to me. I'm still having question marks about this Highlander Mage. I'm not sure just how good its spread is against aggro these days, but it could very well be that Bankyugi was just doing a lot more testing with it than most people expected. Looking at some ladder stats, it actually has some pretty favorable matchups against Galakrond Rogue in particular, but not so much against the Stealth and Weapon Rogue there. So we could have seen just a pretty good outcome for Bankyugi with that mage to begin with, which only speaks to just how comfortable he should be feeling for the rest of the series.
And despite there being Zephyrus in his starting hand, make no mistake, this is not a Highlander warrior that he's playing here. It's just in there for the late game, once you've drawn all the duplicates from your deck to get the Zephyrus effect then, which I can respect. You know, we've seen it in a fair few of the very controlling decks along the way, but it's definitely not common, it feels to me.
Yeah, it definitely speaks to somebody who is confident that they can get the risky skipper battle rage going, and honestly that is the main card draw engine for the deck. So if you're relying on that combo to win most of the matchups, then you could be saying Zephyrus should be active in most of the matchups. I'm not sure if that's going to make it to the more refined lists as the meta moves onward, but definitely the core of the bomb package is looking to be the premier way to run warrior at
And so one of the things that we have to talk about now that we've, for the first time in a while here in APAC, entered what seems to be a fairly slow matchup, is the power of what Mind Render Elucia can do in these kind of matchups. Because obviously it's powerful against aggro, you can just throw it down on turn 2 and try and disrupt their early curve. But against Bomb Warrior, is there anything in particular that you think Tyler is going to be trying to snipe?
Well, we mentioned Zephyrus. That is something that the Priest can steal, and even if it's not active, just that as a potential Tyrion from your pretty big. You can steal Blastmaster Boom if your opponent's not careful, or if you have a pretty good inkling that they've been gearing up to play it. And yeah, I think even the Deathwing is also a potential huge one to steal away, although that would require Elucia to be at the full 10 mana usage.
And I think it's speaks to an interesting counterplay between the two decks, because even though Priest generally wins pretty much any late game fatigue controlling matchup that it goes up against because of all of its ridiculous amounts of generation that it can pile throughout the course of the game, the bombs are really what swing this around back into Bankyugi having a real chance here, because if he's just drawing card after card after card, eventually, if he can find the Wrench Calibers, buff up their durability with the Corsair Cache, I think Bankyugi could be in a good spot to just burst his opponent down with all the bombs.
Yeah, I'd have to agree that would be the main win condition for Bankyugi, because while this warrior deck has a control shell to it, it has Brawls, it has Blade Storms, that type of game plan doesn't work against Priest, because Priest just generates too much value once they get Galakrond down, and even before that, Zugul, etc. So I think that Bankyugi should have to prioritize being more aggressive here, whether it be with bombs or with minion presence, and Blood Boil Brute is probably the best thing he can get down this early to start pressuring Tyler.
Thy blood be born again.
Tyler just starting off with the Disciple of Galakrond there, given that the Apotheosis is a little bit short of being able to take a nice value trade onto the Blood Boil Brute. Looks like Tyler's just going to use a relatively lackluster Wave of Apathy, perhaps, to make sure that the Blood Boil Brute value trade in response. However, I feel like that wave could get more usage because he did just generate a Cabal Shadow Priest for later.
Yeah, that feels like a pretty nutty combo to me. It feels like a very aggressive use here when it's probably going to be a very long spanning game here. But it's an interesting way to take it, and an interesting approach to the matchup in general, because this is quite clearly very aggressively fighting for board control. Maybe speaks to Tyler's mindset about the matchup in general, which is to say, you can't let it go to the late game. You can't be playing these slow fatigue styles in the matchup. You got to go aggressive, lock down the board right now, and it may pay off for him.
That is a possibility, that to say if he expects Bankyugi to be playing aggressively, then Tyler, in turn, would not be trying to eke out every last bit of value from his deck. Bankyugi, I think, a 3-card Battle Rage while it's available here. Definitely can't be too about that. And picks up ever-crucial Wrench Caliber to start the bomb train going.
I mean, this, again, in its own right, also speaks to Bankyugi's perspective of the matchup, drawing quite a lot of cards there, clearly anticipating that it's not going to come down to his own fatigue clock versus Tyler's. Obviously, primarily due to the bombs, you'd have to imagine being shuffled in and killing Tyler nice and quickly. But it's looking like it's not going to be the super slow control matchup that we may have anticipated.
Yeah, I don't think the Warrior can afford to go for that game plan and expect to win, given that Priest has a lot more card generation to play with. However, the Warrior does run bigger dual threats in the deck. I've seen some builds with Grommash at the top end there. Not available for Bankyugi, but the Deathwing, just as a 12/12, if it's not answered by a Shadow Word Death on the other side, can take some surprise wins there.
Yeah, he of course needs to have, always in the back of his mind, what if my opponent goes Murazond? In order to copy any big minion he plays. And thankfully for him, if he did just throw down Deathwing, he'd have a couple of ways to work through it with, like, Blade Flurry, oh sorry, Blade Storm, or just going with a Brawl. He should be okay here for the next few turns, no matter what he does.
Tyler just restored guaranteed Disciple of Galakron there. Sorry, not guaranteed. There was also a Karj that died. But I think it's pretty good that he got another Invoke.
Yeah, it's a big deal. It's a lot of tempo that he's wrestling away now.
I'm just very curious about how Tyler will time this Illucia. At any given point, I suppose the average hand you would expect from this deck is a bunch of removal. So it could be that Illucia is used to pull out a Brawl from the other side.
Yeah, I think that's a great response. Just going for like Illucia double Bladestorm and then next turn hoping to actually stick a board sounds pretty powerful. The problem is, of course, that Illucia is a double-edged sword. You've got to be careful about how you use it, because if he just plays it and then uses a couple of removal pieces, Bankyugi can just go like Murazond or Cabal Shadow Priest, just throw down these threats onto the board and then try, and then Tyler in response won't have the removal he needs to clear it up.
And that might be why we've seen Tyler play his cards a little bit more loosely than you would expect from this matchup. It could be that he's trying to empty his hand for the Illucia turn. But this, in all respects, is a decent Murazond already, because he gets to copy that Dr. Krastenov off. I think using Murazond for relatively low value like this indicates that he does want to go for an Illucia in the near future.
I mean, it's just very, very high tempo, all things considered, with the early wave of apathy.
Whoa. That's a full board of Boombots if he wants it. And crucially, Bankyugi can play it before Tyler goes for Illucia. So I'm looking at swinging into the Armor Smith and then playing the Boom, but because Soul Mirror is also a bit threatening, there's a possibility to just go off with the bombs immediately. He wants to cash in the Skipper. There's also just a Deathwing line. Man, it's really tough.
I mean,
you cannot put Tyler on having Illucia right up next, I suppose.
Someone's gotta lead the charge.
It's pretty devastating if he does, though, to be fair. Just being able to go with, what, Barov, Skipper, clear the board.
Yeah.
Few different ways to go about it.
So Tyler, if he's not going for that line, doesn't actually have a very good risk. We could just see this become the Illucia turn. He's going to start with Renew, dig for a more consistent way to deal with this Deathwing, but it's not there. You gonna rip it? Coin first.
Yeah, it looks
Make sure
like
you don't give it to your opponent. Oh man, that's gonna be devastating for Bankyugi.
Yeah, this is the turn. There was little that he could do about it, and now his board is gonna get wiped out.
And Tyler could be saying, oh, I could play this Boom and deny all of the... Oh, wait. The decks are swapped, so the Boom goes off, right? For Tyler.
True.
So he can go Risky Skipper Boom and in all likelihood deal with the Deathwing.
And also deal a whole bunch of damage. That's a tough one for sure.
I'll show you who's pirates away.
Man. Okay, well, this does get rid of more cards from Bankyugi's return, but I wonder if it was better for Tyler to just take the Boom.
I mean, this destroys so many cards from the hand, right? This is just basically almost all the minion development outside of Blastmaster Boom, or at least significantly diminished.
And for Bankyugi, it's a similar question. Oh, I just drew the Soul Mirror. I can deny Tyler from having this ace in the hole to deal with my Boom next turn, which he knows back. But if he goes Soul Mirror now, then he's not able to ball Shadow Priest. I kind of like getting rid of Tyler's Soul Mirror, though.
I wonder.
Because it's the best response to the Boom coming the other way. So if he just goes Soul Mirror and then Cabal Acolyte, still ends up ahead on board. And then Tyler doesn't have a response for Boom.
I must choose.
Man, this is
Again,
kind of messing
it's
with my
tough,
head.
right? Yeah. For both of these players, they have the option of either play the power card from their opponent's hand or dump all the resources. And it's not an easy choice at all.
Not to mention, even though you should technically have full information of what's left in the opponent's hand, except where they top deck on that turn after switching decks, it is so difficult to keep up with all of that info.
And while it was pretty terrifying there for Bankyugi, or kind of poor in terms of losing a lot of his options with removal, it was pretty bad for Tyler as well. He's lost almost all of his real threats.
And now Tyler knows Boom is very likely to come down on the other side, so he'll be hesitant to play this Soul Mirror right now, but if he doesn't play it right now, then he's just taking another 8 next turn. No matter which way Tyler falls behind here. Is this just a Cabal Soul Mirror turn? I don't see a way to
think it
beat
can be Soul Mirror. Yeah, well, I suppose the one blessing at the moment for Tyler is that there's quite a lot of minions on board for his opponent's side. It's kind of a blessing and a curse, because obviously he's taking 8 damage every turn, but it somewhat shuts off the possibility of a good Blastmaster Boom.
Yeah, I don't think that's a blessing. This is just mind-bending to me, because usually as casters, we try to talk from the player's perspective of not knowing what is in their opponent's hand,
Right.
despite us knowing. But now, us going into the heads of the players should be, well, they should know what's in their opponent's hand because of the blade. One thing's abundantly clear, Tyler is looking very dead to this Boom.
As it currently stands, it definitely seems so. There's no Plague of Death in the deck. Soul Mirror has already obviously come down.
Thy blood, behold.
Is that your bomb going off impression?
That was my goodness me, Tyler is dead impression. That's
Well,
a
you
good
can steal a
outcome.
bomb.
That's a very, very good minion to generate there.
Yeah. Definitely is.
Dance, puppet, dance.
It's out perfectly with the mana.
Yeah.
We could be seeing the most explosive brawl of all time here. There's a
Bang, bang, bang.
non-guaranteed way to maneuver Bladestorm to deal Flash
Right.
Giant, but that feels a bit too risky. Okay, maybe less so now. It's actually guaranteed that he can Bladestorm away the Flash Giant now, right?
Trade. Yeah, it's guaranteed.
Yeah. But given that he had 2 Brawls in hand, I was still looking at just going for Brawl. Alternatively, he could hold everything because he's at freaking 41 HP and doesn't
Very
have to
true.
care about an 8/8.
Yeah, and it's also just all the bombs that are going to start coming through for Tyler turn after turn. He needs what, Galakrond to start generating some extra threats?
We've just come to a very weird impasse now. Bankyugi is valuing the Brawl's higher farm. I have to say it's very questionable when both players have no minions and they're top decking, but that's huge for Tyler.
That is huge.
Zero
It's holding it
drop
back for the moment. Yeah. Pretty comical battle rage, but it's a couple reasons, I guess, for Tyler to hold on to it. Obviously, to destroy a minion with the battle cry, but also just because he wants the heal, I suppose, to start getting out of range of these bombs, which are going to start coming thick and fast.
Yeah, might be. I mean, it's several waves of removal, or not waves, but it removes several minions potentially from Bankyugi's side, whereas Tyler has 0 removal left.
And so despite having the ability to deal 15 damage to his opponent and summon an 8/8 all at the same time, Tyler here is opting to go for the defensive Alexstrasza, you'd have to imagine, in order to heal once the bombs come through, which makes sense. You know, it's one of the ways to try and survive.
matchup has gone nowhere near how I expected it to in both phases. It seemed like in phase 1 at the beginning of the game, both players were playing for maximum tempo, where you and I expected them to hold on to more resources. And now that we're towards halfway through the deck for Tyler, or further because a lot of those cards are bombs, they're playing very, very conservatively.
That's a nice pickup. Maybe he can start the Sethek train coming down as soon as Bankyugi plays a minion.
On wings of destruction,
If this is just becoming a game of chicken waiting for the first player to blink, I have to do something at some point because he has tons of bombs in the deck. He is, I mean, Bankyugi is able to stack HP on top of the natural 30. And Bankyugi, I don't expect him to go for a shield block at this point. Oh. I thought we were being conservative now, Darok. What's the game plan?
So what, were you saying he's going to just try and not fatigue?
Yeah, I mean, the way that he's been holding on to these brawls, it looked like that was the game plan. But I guess with Zephyrus in hand, maybe he's thinking about just trying to get that active so he can get down lethal.
Yeah, I respect this line from Bankyugi. It's definitely consistent at the very least, if you want to go that way, because he's been drawing cards throughout the entire game, not slowing down now. And I think it's reasonable to assume that you are going to have enough bombs in your opponent's deck, especially with resummoning another Wrench Caliber here, in order to be able to kill your opponent before you die.
Alright, you've sold me. Well, here is the beginning of the train. Ray's dead. His every last bit of health is there at this point. Active Zephyrus.
Active Zeph. So you could go for Inner Demon for 8 damage, which is then 13. Obviously, potentially representing lethal with the sheer number of bombs in the deck.
Looks a little bit short, so I wouldn't mind Bankyugi holding on a bit longer. I do want to see him use some of these removal spells to get rid of at least the Sethek, because that has potential to ruin everything he's patiently built up towards.
Yeah, and I guess it's worth mentioning as well that if you don't have the lethal, it probably isn't going to be offering you Inner Demon there. You're going to get, you know, Tyrion or something else.
And while Tyrion did seem like a good prospect, it looks like Bankyugi also just wants to get all the charges of Wrench Caliber down. And go face first with his Horde Pillager, and then Quartermaster. Or rather, he just wants to get the skipper out of the way because it's just a liability now.
And again, now for Tyler, we've got to be thinking, what's your win con, man? How are you actually going to pull yourself out of this one? Because with yet more bombs in the deck, I do not see it.
I've been unclear on the win con since the turn the Galacron was held. I thought he was supposed to slam that. But obviously he was valuing healing to deal with the bombs, which makes sense to some extent. If the healing comes at the cost of development, then Bankyugi just has to chill at that point, right?
Yeah, because Tyler's game plan, I think quite clearly, is to try and outlast the bombs, it felt like, or use the Galacron as just that little bit of extra removal to help him while he does try and out-heal.
He picked up Apotheosis, though, and has some... Well, you can't target the evasive with it, but potentially if Alex draws a sticks, that's to outlast bombs now, so Tyler is just saying to play Galacron. Didn't get very good targets with what he removed with it. And honestly, we could just play the Price is Right for how many bombs are left in the deck. I have no idea. It's got to be a lot.
I mean, it's like 7 at this point, right? It's got to be at least half the deck.
But Zephyrus does not recognize bombs being in the deck.
True.
So he's settling for Tyrion here, I suppose.
Put your faith in the light.
Okay, that's not the avenue I was anticipating him going down, but I guess there are few ways for Tyler to really take advantage of this, with the Cabal Acolyte already gone, the Wave of Apathy gone as well.
Dark, he's praying. Is it for Plague of Death?
It looked like the only real way to shore up this board. Mind Games isn't going to be doing much of anything.
Nothing's doing much of anything. Can't deal with
Yep.
the Tyrion. Unsleeping Soul can only target friendly minions, and also you would not want to summon a copy of Tyrion, even if it did not have Death Rattle anymore. Looking like game. This is just such a weird matchup. In the way
I mean, this is a weird matchup, not only in terms of Hearthstone, but for Asia Pacific. What's happened here? We've entered reality, it feels like, where no longer is it 2-minute games that are over before you can even get started analyzing what's happening.
I'm just shocked at the way it went.
Oh!
Oh, wait.
That's a
He
brawl.
can brawl! He can brawl! You won't have 100% read on it being in hand, but Bankyugi had so few cards left.
Yeah.
But then, even if you brawl and the Tyrion dies, he still has to contend with an Ashbringer, so
Yeah.
I guess it's fine to hold on to Illusion.
It's not game winning. It's just weird for me as well, Gia, to try and say definitively that Tyler is out of the game, because Priest always has a trick up its sleeve. There's always something that it can do to pull victory from the jaws of defeat.
If they had infinite mana from this position, maybe, but I'm not seeing it for Tyler.
Yeah.
And Bankyugi, I think it's fine for him to tank the 7, and so just preserve 2 more minions here.
Well, he could go, if he goes for trading in exactly the 7 damage with Zephyrus and the Pillager, he could get his opponent down to 5.
Oh, that's true.
With
1 bomb
Tyrion
range.
and the swing. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a very
Which is-
significant breakpoint.
Close as to whether or not it's worth it. Not necessarily.
Well, in the end, he's going to value the board presence. And, you know, it's been this considered from Bankyugi, even though he's been in such a good spot for this long, because he's thinking exactly what you said. Priest always has some scam up their sleeve. He's been trying his best to make sure that that would not happen.
And so
Wait a sec. What if Bankyugi draws all the bombs now?
how many would that have to be in a row? Like, if every card in the deck is bombs, I guess?
Yeah,
Even
but
then
he's
he's
still
alive.
not dying. I do not know what's happening. Gonna be completely honest. But I wish Tyler would have let us see Bankyugi potentially draw the bombs back. But what a game.
Yep, it just feels like Tyler knew what was up right from the get-go, to be perfectly honest, with his game plan, fighting for tempo as aggressively as humanly possible right from the start of the game in order to try and just go for an early victory. And I think also Bankyugi knew that fact as well, with his very liberal use of the Blood Boil Brutes, just trying to fight back against that board, meaning he didn't take too much damage in the early game. I think it was a very heads-up play from both sides.
Just have so many questions, Derek. Like about the Illusia plays, I was really, really tempted to deny your opponent a boom, and from Bankyugi's perspective, deny Tyler their Soul Mirror. Of course, what they went for is very clear, that they want to deny more cards instead of the one biggest threat of a card, and that ending out pretty well for Bankyugi. But I also have a question as to whether Tyler was supposed to jam that Galakron earlier. Very well, he could have died 2 bombs much earlier, but maybe he could have generated another Illusia sooner, another Murazon, something like that. It's just, there's so many ways that the matchup can go, and there's so much to be explored, I suppose, in terms of the philosophy of how you approach it.
There really is. And so far, I think Tyler has, as you can clearly see, been pretty on the money with his Priest play, well above positive win rate when it has been able to be played. Obviously, I'd have to imagine being banned a fair amount along the way. Because this is the kind of thing that Tyler does very, very well. I think if you could apply any weakness to his strategy, it would be in like cohesive deck selection, because he has one mode, and that is bring the best decks and play the best decks better than anyone else because I've played them more. And generally, it's a pretty successful strategy. It's worked for him in the past. But yeah, one thing you cannot fault him on is grinding out the games with the most powerful decks and knowing the matchups very, very well.
And despite all of that, Bankyugi finds himself in an overwhelmingly favored position. When we were looking at these first two matchups, Mage versus Rogue, we thought the Rogue would run away with it because Mage has limited healing and ways to freeze face. And then in the Priest versus Warrior, we were thinking, oh, Priest has so much value.
Yeah.
Maybe that's a reason for running Highlander, for example, as opposed to Galakron. That deck has even more value, I have to say. Or maybe it was just a fringe scenario for that outcome, but no matter which way you slice it, Bankyugi is so far in the league now, has a prize to get a win with Galakron Rogue.
Yeah, I think that Bankyugi is a worthy successor to me for Staz. They have kind of a similar vibe in terms of deck selection because they bring weird stuff that I do not necessarily always understand the reasoning behind. But it just generally seems to work out, and I end up looking foolish. Obviously, sadly, it was not the best ending for Staz being relegated out last season. But I can respect the innovation, if nothing else, from Bankyugi.
Well, time will tell if he treats this mage the same way Staz treated Highlander Hunter.
Oh, yes.
But for now, Galakron Rogue is yet another arc which is largely similar to what we saw before the Scholomance Academy meta. Just like the Highlander Mage that Bankyugi is bringing. It could very well be that he is more comfortable playing things that he's more familiar with, or he's tried the new stuff and just said, it's not as good as what's tried and true.
Yeah, I'm also very interested by this mulligan from Bankyugi because before rotation against Druid as the Galakron Rogues, in my opinion, you generally weren't keeping Evil Miscreant. It wasn't quite aggressive enough in moving towards your own win condition with Edwin and, of course, the Questing Adventurers as well. But the deck has changed quite a bit since then. No more Questing Adventurers in there. Obviously, you still have Edwin. So instead, it's maybe relying on more of a mid-game wide board approach, given that you have Jandis, Potion of Illusion, Infiltrator Lillian as a very powerful mid-game play as well.
Yeah. That makes sense in terms of how the deck is built, that what you might assume it wants to do versus Druid, but I don't quite think going for a mid-game push would be good enough because generally by the time you play your 4 or 5 mana things, Druid is playing their 7, 8 mana things.
That's true.
And those are much bigger than what Rogue has to offer. So I would tend to believe that you're meant to go for a more aggressive push and mulligan hard for Edwin at the beginning. But outside of Edwin, it doesn't look like there's very much aggression available to Bankyugi to begin with. So yet again, I feel like lining up the deck list that Rogue would be in a difficult position here. But Bankyugi has proven us wrong time and time again. So I'm curious how this one will pan out.
It's a tough spot here for Tyler. Gidra, like, it's not that good. Even if we ignore the secret, it doesn't kill Hanar, obviously. But then there's a 50% chance. Or, sorry, I take that back. There's 2 of each secrets of Ambush and Dirty Tricks. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's a 50% chance to be either one, though, of course, because Bankyugi kept this secret on the mulligan. So Tyler can start to, I think, get an idea that it's probably Dirty Tricks because you're not keeping Ambush in the mulligan against Druid.
Yeah, Druids tend to not play minions until after they've played spells. It's one of the fringe scenarios, and Tyler makes the read, gets it right, and is... I'm a bit surprised to see him damage down his Gidra, where a Praise Galakron can now deal with it, but not damaging it means that it's affected by Seal Fate.
Yeah, I think it makes sense to me. You just want to be making sure that no matter what happens, you have a higher chance as possible of killing off the Hanar next turn.
Sure. Well, Bankyugi just gonna start off with a praise here. Dig for Aki that can preserve his Hanar. Doesn't quite hit it though. That's like the worst one to get in this situation.
Yeah, it's kind of good for later on, but I mean, I think the thing is that here you are pretty much always having to trade the Gidra because the overgrowth is just too scary of a prospect.
He could roll again for another Lackey, and you would give up the immediate secret generation, but if he hits Titanic, Faceless, or Kobold, I think it's well worth the tempo.
Yeah, I think it's a very smart way to go because you can still go for Never Surrender afterwards, of course, as well, to fill out your mana and get the extra secret.
True. Piling up another Dirty Tricks, which won't be playable for a while, but I think against Druid, of course, you're very confident it's going to get procced at some point.
That is not ramp, which is pretty much the only thing that Tyler was looking for. And obviously Glowfly Swarm is looking extremely underwhelming. The question...
Well, Runic Carvings is basically a Glowfly without
True.
the spells in hand condition, and he could have played it next turn, given Nature Studies.
I guess the thing is that he already has plays for the next few turns, and this allows him to go for just a nice easy Twilight Runner into Overflow, most likely.
Okay. Well, Bankyugi, for the top end of the deck, or mid-end, I should say, that's where the new cards are in there. He's running Infiltrator Lillian and the Lore Keeper Polkelt. That's the very fun with the Galakron at the top of his deck. Of course, it's not going into the 7-mana turn yet, so Bankyugi's not going for it, but that's a pretty interesting way to go about it, because you are likely to get Kronks right after.
Yes, exactly. And of course, you are also then going to be drawing High Sparrow, Togwaggle, Shield of Galakron, Flick Skyshift, all for 1 mana once you play your Galakron on that later turn. And I think that is really, that's for me the reason to play Galakron Rogue anymore, because it feels like it's going to be mostly outclassed in the early and mid game by the aggro rogues and of course any of the other tempo decks. But once you hit that mid to late game point where you're getting down Galakron, cheating out all that mana, that is ludicrously powerful. That is beat Druid powerful, potentially.
Indeed. I was looking at a potential cute play for Bankyugi here. He could have gone face with Lillian and Seal Fated it and taken the 50-50 for the Death Rattle to attack the Stealth minion.
Sure.
All things considered, probably not worth it. And so Bankyugi is just filling out the run-up with the Miscred.
I mean, he could still have gone for it at the end of the turn there, right, with Kobold Lackey on his own guy. I agree. Probably not worth it, all things considered.
Tyler can take the draw first. It's just so weird, right? Because he kind of wants to overflow, but then he won't be attacking with the Twilight Runner in that instance.
I mean, maybe it's just not
Because
an overflow turn.
Yeah, I think that makes sense. It's just probably Crystal Power and then play another Twilight Runner.
Yeah.
Oh, that's painful though. Completely forgot about the Never Surrender I did.
Okay. Bog Beam, unless you really want to spend the bees on this turn, which I'm not really seeing.
Yeah, I don't see it either.
What?
Is there any possibility for Nourish
Right.
Ramp this turn?
Yeah, I was just looking at that as well. You get down the Anubisath Defender at the same time.
The sound of that, you can fit in Crystal Power too.
Pretty cool line, actually. Being able to get down the Ysera as well next turn into draw. This is where the Druid starts doing its own broken late game stuff as well.
Yeah, despite Tyler's very, very slow early game,
Yeah.
the game plan is coming together, but Bankyugi himself has no shortage of power plays in the near future.
I mean, what do you even do in terms of your powerful stuff? I mean, you could go Togwaggle for Wand and then Lawkeeper plus Wand on the same turn.
Oh my... Oh!
Oh!
1 mana Galakron, 1 mana Kronk. Guaranteed unless he immediately draws it off the top the next turn.
Disgusting.
I mean, if we're looking at that, I don't care if he's overdrawing. I just want to see that happen.
Yeah, literally. I mean, he doesn't even have to go for it next turn, right? He could play the Togwaggle here, take some value trades.
Sorry, I meant 0 mana. I forgot that it was Galakron that got nerfed, not Kronk. Oh, man.
Choose soon.
Going for a more measured approach here. I'd like to see a Rush Lackey potentially come down. Okay, the dagger here, I feel... If Bankyugi was struggling with hand space,
Yes.
I didn't like the look of... I mean, I didn't mind the look of just going Evolve Lackey or Rush Lackey plus Blackjack Center for no value, just to make space.
Yeah,
As long as he saves 1 Lackey in hand for Tog.
I was just about to say the same thing. I think you can just very happily get away with dumping some cards here. Because, again, that's where the power plays start coming in. You need to get cards out of hand for Togwaggle to come down and start cheating out those 0 mana big boys.
Well, it could very well happen next turn instead. Bankyugi, if he wants, he can clear the Ysera with the Lillian and a Rush on the Togwaggle. And also the Lillian Death Rattle has a chance of dealing another 4 to Ysera.
Yeah, I guess you start off with the Lillian attack if that's the route you're going to go for.
Mm-hmm. I'd like to see that.
Yeah. I think otherwise you're wandering into the territory of allowing for trade plus overflow to heal back up out of range.
Or he could just ship everything to base. I can respect this line as well. I'm just gearing up for the Polkelt one.
Oh, that's going to be so powerful. And so Tyler needs to, of course, smell that something scary is coming now. He's got to start ramping up his own power plays. And how does he go about that? Is this just overflow on this turn to draw some dragons?
Yep, definitely looks like it. You will miss out on 1 space in hand, and then the draw will be overdrawn. Oh, never mind. Gets the Anubisoth, so that makes some room for the next draw. But honestly, is he gonna survive this next turn? I've not seen this Polkelt Wand interaction just yet, but I'm so...
We're just going to sit back
does
and watch.
Bankyugi have enough space in hand to do everything he wants?
Well, that's the problem, right? This was the reason to just start dumping some of the cards on previous turns.
Yeah. He's gonna go up to 10 with the next draw, then Polkelt 1, he'll only draw 2 cards, so it's the Galakron plus either Flick or Kronks.
Right.
If he hits Kronks, though, then
Well, no,
his whole board gets buffed.
Because he can play a 1-cost guy, then play the wand, right? So he'll draw all 3 of Galakron, Kronks, and Flick,
Okay.
guaranteed.
Okay, okay. Sure. And then the fireworks go off.
Yeah, Tyler's sensing that something bad is about to happen here.
So first you make room for Flick,
Yeah.
and then you play then you play the Flick, then the Galakron.
Oh,
This is easily the best thing I've seen out of this expansion just yet.
Who'd have thought that bloomin' old school Galakron rogue would end up being the absolute powerhouse like this?
Oh my goodness.
Oh,
With the board and hand space limitations, I don't think Bankyugi could have gotten an immediate lethal there, but this may as well be lethal. Look at that board!
yeah, nice try, Tyler, but you are going to be fighting it out in the lower bracket, my friend. There is no coming back from this.
Any dragons that can do some shenanigans? Nope. Don't think so.
I concede.
Throws it down, and my goodness, what a first display that we get to see on stream from Bankyugi here. Incredible performance with his very off-meta lineup. Nobody bringing anything quite like him here in Asia Pacific. But with a 3-0 sweep over one of the most storied players, one of the most storied competitors that we have here in Asia Pacific, taking down Tyler, he made it look easy.
You and I were left speechless there. I'm pretty sure Tyler as well. We saw his reactions just saying, fact, man, that combo was absolutely nuts. From that match alone, I am completely inspired to just jam this on ladder now. Polkelt into Wand. Make no mistake, nobody's ever going to take goblins or kobolds again, even in APAC. This is where it's at.
Gia, we can't go back. We spent an entire expansion playing nothing but Galakron Rogue. We have to move on, okay? It's not healthy for us to keep up this addiction to Galakron Rogue. We've got to go with some other decks. But as we are taking quite a long process so far today, even with a 3-0 sweep there, it's still been some long games today compared to what we've usually come to expect in APAC. So we're going to jump straight into a break and let Bankyugi prepare for his finals match, which will be coming up after this. In the winners bracket match, we'll be finding out who goes to the semi-final on Sunday. We'll be back right after.